Here, then I'm gonna start on my phone. So we are doubling down on audio here. But
Hmm.
how are you, first of all? I know we've never met. We both know Majora. That's about it.
Yeah. Life is filled with lots of interesting challenges.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to sit with all of them and just recognize the sort of the gifts of difficulty and also the gifts of bounty, and know that the challenges lurking within bounty.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, I'm pretty good. And yourself?
yeah. I'm doing good, and probably in very similar situation. You've got at least in my world, I feel like I have lots of opportunity, but I don't necessarily have the capacity to take advantage of it all.
Mm,
And
mm.
so that then you have to pick and choose, or
Yeah, that's
just
real.
do some hard nose to people about
Yeah, that's
stuff.
real.
And but hopefully at the end of the day you get the things you want, and life kind of works out. So
Yeah, I do trust. I definitely am. I believe in God, and I do trust that the larger plan is in play, and
yeah,
when this all kind of shakes out, and we're all sort of, I'll be like, oh, okay,
yeah.
that's what that was about. I
Yeah,
see.
yeah,
It's like a life is like a telenovela. I always say
yeah,
it's like, always in some kind of soap opera. There's like some amazing thing happens, and then there's like some villain creeping around the corner,
yeah,
and then whenever there's like a terrible thing that happens, some little spark of goodness is right there.
yeah,
So that's kind of how I kind of my perspective on things.
yeah. There's always a little drama, and
Yeah,
yeah, and some ray of sunshine,
that's
or at
right.
least
That's right.
finding, I mean, a lot of times it really comes down to a person's perspective if you can actually find that
Mm,
ray
mm,
of sunshine, because particularly in these times, there just seems to be so much global negativity that it is hard to find that
yeah.
shining light. So oh boy. But anyway, I thought we would go through, I mean, and I kind of have trying to give people, options. You ain't gotta stick to the questions, and all that kind of stuff. I just, your story. I don't know your story. So
Hmm.
if
Hmm.
my questions aren't um, really the format in which you tell your story, then just
Mm,
tell your story,
mm,
and I will pick it apart and find those pieces that create your chapter, and then of course get that. In fact, I just got Majora's. I mean, I did my edit on her stuff. I sent it to her, and just maybe last week she sent back her edits,
mm.
and so I haven't even had a chance to look at it yet, but I just try to give everybody that option of making sure that it sounds like them,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
and and nothing, I'm not really including any information that you know wasn't said. I'm just
yeah,
simply pulling out the things to try to make these little headers, and maybe 100 words a header, 100
yeah,
words, that kind of
yeah,
thing.
yeah,
So but anyway, we just want to basically always start with who you are, what you do, where you live, that kind of thing.
yeah. Those are all like slightly complicated, only because life has been very intriguing in the past couple years. I would say, um, the other day I was in Brooklyn on St. John's between Washington and Underhill, and I posted on social media that if I was to start a movie about my life, that could be a place to start the movie. There's other places that it could start. You can dip in and out of people's lives and figure out those starting points. But if you remember the movie New Jack City, um, the end of that block was like New Jack City, and there was like a big, huge apartment building that had people stationed out front, There was adjacent to that, on the next corner, across the corner diagonal, was another gigantic apartment building that had people lived in there, and people were squatting in there, and they had like, you know, I remember people had they opened up the fire hydrant regularly, like in the winter. And I remember thinking, why are they opening the fire hydrant? Well, I remember asking people, why do you guys have this open? And they were like, because we don't have any water. And they didn't have water for a long time. And so you had this situation where people were making like crack money across the street, and people living like, subsistence living, like almost like village kind of living, and going downstairs to get water from the watering hole to bring it upstairs into the building. This is in the 80s. And, the back of our building, I was telling my sons the other day, we would hear gunshots every night. And just the idea, and we weren't like, listen, some people tell stories about their life where they're like, oh, my, mom and dad and this and uncle. My family was beautiful. I had like, I love me and my father to this day. He and I have like one of the best relationships out of anybody that I know with their father. Like, and I'm not exaggerating. All the dumb things I've ever done, I've talked about with him. He and I talk about every single aspect, every major decision. I talk to my dad. He and I have been to Hajj together. We made the pilgrimage to Mecca together. He's a major, same thing with my mom. She knows my mom, they're not together, but they have always been like anchors, emotional, spiritual, cultural, exposing me to beautiful things. But still, because it was that era, it was crazy. And I can't even imagine, like, we literally grew up in like what you could consider like a war zone. Like, there's no place in the United States right now that is equal to the way that things were in the crack era. It just wasn't, because you didn't have that kind of like volume of drugs and guns and all the activity. And so I've been reflecting a lot on like, who am I and my journey. And it's been like, to be a kid in that moment and to imagine my life, I could have never imagined the places that I've been, the people that I've interacted with, the stuff that I've done. And I feel like I've left a lot on the table still. Like, I still have a lot left to do. Like, a lot. Like, so much so that sometimes I feel like I'm a failure. So where I come from is Black, Muslim, Brooklyn, militant. We thought the revolution was coming. And I didn't see white people. I remember the first time I saw a white person, I was like, Daddy, what's wrong with him? And he was like, shh, I'll tell you later. And he told me later, that's a white person. Like, we were so protected from, that reality. That was such a blessing. So then that was a sort of incubator for my understanding of the universe. And then later on, we moved upstate New York, which was all white, but not rich white. This is like country white and like farmers, and and come to find out later on, a lot of the dads were also involved in the crack trade and the cocaine trade. So these are like rural, poor white folks. I didn't know all that detail. But it was like sports, and it was like, just like hard work and, success in football and basketball and baseball and track. And my brother was almost a state champion, and I was in the running for those same things too. And we were elite, we both got full scholarships in our respective sports. And then, we would live upstate because of all that danger. My dad was like, we're out of here. He was upstate. And then in the summer times, we would be in New York City, and we would be at the African Street Festival, and we would be, around all the beautiful cultural expressions that Blackness had to offer then, that doesn't really exist in the same way now, in that same way, in that understanding now. So we were really blessed. I just feel like we saw the gamut, and we saw the sort of, I think, almost like a beautiful expression of Black culture that almost would never exist now, because there's so much police presence, and there's so much gentrification, and there's so much like imposition of other ideas and thoughts through the internet. And we were creating our own sort of thing, and we were exposed to that. And then we were upstate, and we were in like basically like 1950s America, where it was like, you're trying to make varsity, you're trying to get on the team, you're trying to, impress your coach, trying to get the A in the class. And so I had a very, very unconventional experience, which was all a serious blessing. I ended up getting a full scholarship for football to University of Rhode Island. Had a number of different offers. I remember I got an offer from Cornell, and I had a couple other Ivies that were interested, and I actually had an offer from West Point as well. And I rarely tell this, but I remember one time, I was my junior year, because they signed you in your junior year, and the recruiter was in my house, the paper was on my desk, I had the pen in my hand, my dad, the recruiter, myself, and I just looked at the pen and I just put it down, and I was like, I can't do this. And he was like, why? And I was like, I just don't want to learn how to kill people. And I remember thinking like, no, maybe I could kill someone, but not for this country, not for this flag. If someone broke in my house, yeah, I got to do what I got to do. Exactly, got to do what you got to do. But for me to think of, you can send me anywhere you want to send me in the world, and tell me those are the bad guys, I couldn't stomach it. I was not interested in that experience. And he had been holding himself tight. I think he was like, I'm gonna get this guy, I'm gonna get this guy. And then I just was like, I didn't do it. And such an interesting thing. But I ended up getting a full scholarship to University of Rhode Island, mainly because when I visited it, I looked at the ocean, and it was like, oh my God, the ocean. We went and visited, and I was like, how could I go anywhere else in this landlocked world? It's so much funny, because almost all the decisions I made have been drawn by being, by a connection to nature, by like, what was I going to access here? And I remember thinking, if I go other places, I'll get, I could have gone to lots of other schools and had great experiences and done the college thing. And, maybe even if I had gone to Villanova, I've been a 1AA football national champion, and other places, or UMass and some of the places that were recruiting me. But I literally chose the University of Rhode Island because we were like going over the bridge to Newport. And I was like, how could I turn away from this ocean? Being so close to the water. And then, so that's sort of like the kickoff, the blessing. And the reason why I like to always frame like my story about getting a full scholarship. Two things: that my dad came to me and my older brother, and he basically, there's 6 of us, and he told us, I can't pay for you guys to go to school. The money that I have is for your sisters who are younger than you. So you're the older boys, you guys have to figure it out on your own. And that's the other side of patriarchy that people don't like to talk about. I think it's the right way to express it. And so me and my brother made a deal. I remember we were up late night one night, we're like, all right, let's get scholarships. Let's get those full scholarships. He got a track scholarship, I got a football scholarship. And that meant, and this is an important thing, is that I did not have any debt when I got out of college. And in Islam, debt is basically haram. It's impermissible. You're not supposed to be in debt. And so I didn't have that kind of weight on my back when I graduated. So then I was free to follow my heart and my interests and my values. And I basically had a theme that I've maintained since then, that I wanted to make money. I didn't want to make money I didn't want to become rich by compromising my principles. Like I never wanted to have to break my deep held values to make my money or make a living. So I took, jobs like as an organizer or as a mover or as a, things that were like simple, things that didn't, and I lived simple. I lived like in a room in Boston out of college with my brother, and he had another room in where he was at because he was getting his PhD. Um, so I just was, I didn't have a lot and I didn't want a lot. And because it seemed like, more money, more problems was like legit, was like a real deal thing. And so that's kind of set me up that almost every decision I've made about what I've been interested in has had some connection to either um, protecting the planet in some specific way, organizing and activism in some specific way, or working with young people in a very specific way. And that's kind of the threads that have woven through my life. Some of my early work was I worked with Outward Bound. I used to take young people out on really like wilderness adventure trips on an island in Boston Harbor. We used to get young people into like the marsh areas, and they used to, these urban kids, getting them to like look at like getting them into detritus and getting their hands in the mud and to find little like baby fish or different little creatures, and their minds being blown was like some of the most beautiful experiences of my life. Not having to have an ID or having keys on me. As a young Black man, I didn't have to have my ID to prove who I was. I didn't have keys because all the places I lived were outdoors. I lived, under the stars. There was a year that I slept underneath the stars more than I slept inside of a building. Traveled around the country, climbed mountains, did a 22-day expedition in Joshua Tree where, I was in the desert, and it was, I prioritize experiences over accumulation of things. And then sort of still that thread of like following my principles, staying true to who I was. Always connection to some cultural expression, music and art, and being part of those communities and movements, like how I was raised in Brooklyn. And I'd say that like I was in that sort of organizing world and helping connect organizers and activists. And then I reached this really I put together a database of a youth organizing database called the Future 500 with a group of other people. This is in 2001. That's actually how I first became aware of Majora and a lot of others that have done some critical work. And in that experience, I really just met people. I met people all over the country. So I got extremely well networked, but also learned about like technology. And I worked on a database. And so I got to understand how to work with technologists and understand like the back end of software and sort of this burgeoning tech movement that was happening. So it was interesting to be on the sort of front end of that experience. So that could have sort of added another thread. So if you think of like the youth work, environment and sustainability and being a steward, and then you add this technology thread, those have been the primary ones that have kind of woven through most of my work. I've always thought of myself as a writer. I remember when I was in second grade, I wrote my first poem. There was a period of time when I thought I was like the greatest poet that ever lived, like every young poet. And then there was a time when I decided that I thought that like poetry, like that it was so ego based that I decided that I didn't want to be that. Like I was worried about what it was doing to me. And I intentionally took a step back, and maybe to my detriment, because I could have, charged forward and probably because I'm sort of charismatic person, and I could have used all of that if I had just went all in and just brought that to the table. but I was just like a little wary of like what that would do to my soul. And so I kind of pulled back and then was like, I'm gonna write things and write stories. So that's where the failure comes in, because I've never really published any of my creative work significantly. I have like 3 books that I've written, novels that are, in various stages of good or terrible, or bad or terrible, you could say. um, uh, but those are still left undone, and God willing, I'll get to them, and hopefully sooner than later. Um, some good ideas, some very good ideas. Um, Execution was excellent for at least one of them. So I've spent a lot of time doing that as well, and mulling over how to do that and how to get people to pay attention to my work and that sort of thing, and the disappointment that comes from whatever dominant culture wants Black people to present themselves as, and you not fitting whatever that mold is. But consistent has always been like the work with that I want to do to help protect the planet. And as I started to shift away from sort of youth organizing work, I shifted into a role at Prospect Park, where my job was to take young people and bring them in better communication with the planet in Brooklyn. And really that was the beginning of sort of a civic participation and sort of like a planner mindset, and thinking about infrastructure, thinking about how we make decisions, and how we around water and waste and energy and food and transportation. I started to contemplate like running for office and what would that look like. One of my early mentors was a guy named James E. Davis. James E. Davis was a police officer who turned into a city councilman in Brooklyn. And we had really substantive conversations early on. I was like going to be potentially an heir apparent to him, and work with him and work with his office to help me to elevate me. And then he got shot. He got murdered in City Hall. It's a crazy story. He was literally murdered by some, angry person from the neighborhood that was a friend of his. It was a very sordid story. No one knows the real backstory. And then a cop who responded to it, actually I know the cop now, he responded and killed the guy with 1 bullet. So it's almost like some weird, no one's ever even done anything about it. It's like this bizarre moment, but weeks before, he and I were in serious conversation. So that kind of was like, whoop, changed things dramatically. In college, I had interned with Buddy Cianci, who was the mayor of Providence, very famous mayor of Providence. And I had imagined myself as, being in the political realm. And I was like, wait a second, maybe that's just like, that's not your path. And then I took a shift and moved west, moved to Oakland, got deeper into the social justice movement world, and immersed myself in like a think tank where we were trying to come up with solutions and come up with different models for things, and called the Movement Strategy Center. But it was also there that I realized that there was some serious flaws with that world and some deficiencies. And the main question I was asking myself was, if our people got elected tomorrow, would we even know what to do? And not only would we know what to do, if we wanted to do some real transformation, was identity politics gonna push us in that direction? So what that I can get Black people to support me if we need to, if the water supply was compromised, or if the wastewater treatment situation had issues, or if electricity infrastructure had some problems, would we know what the heck to do? And then would we lose our opportunity? So that's when I really got really deep into this notion of how do we solve persistent human problems? How do we look at water, waste, food? And so this is the frame that I use. Most of my work now is based on how do we solve those problems in the past? How do we solve them right now in the present? And how will we, and should we, and could we solve them in the future? And, how do we get clean water? Because everybody needs water. If you take some ancient human being who just transitioned from hunter-gatherer, from gatherer to hunter, and just tasted a liver for the first time in their life from some kill that they made, and it was like, whoa, this is amazing. You took that person and, from the Maasai or some other place, and you plop them here now, and they got off whatever that magical bus ride to get here. They'd be like, you got some water? They'd be like, can I go to the bathroom? Where can I go to the bathroom? They'd be like, I'm hungry. What do you got? Later on, they'd be like, I need to go to sleep. Where are we sleeping at? Like those are things that you could not, the persistent human beings need to answer these questions. And so that's the frame. It's like, how do we solve them in the past? How do we solve them in the present? How do we solve them in the future? And so I took that as my orientation. That's the core and the root. I went to grad school. I got my master's in public administration. I really wanted to understand how cities are run. I wasn't interested in like policy ideas. I was interested in like how they're currently run, and what are those decisions made. And in that process, I started articulating a framework that then it became the book that I wrote, Green Deen: What Islam Teaches About Protecting the Planet, to try and reconcile some of those questions with my faith and understanding how those things relate. After I got my master's, I pitched that book, and thankfully I got that pitch to go through. There was an interesting side note that I got a opportunity with, because I've always been, interested in sports and always athletic, and so I I was unemployed for a period of time, and I remember I went to like a WNYC event, and they were talking about Black and brown communities and listening to public radio, and I raised my hand. I was like, black and brown people listen to public radio. I was like, I don't know why y'all think that we don't. I was like, I grew up listening to it with my dad and my mom. Like, that's what we listen to. And they were like, well, do you listen to this stuff now? I'm like, yeah, hell yeah, I listen to this show, I listen to that show. So they pulled me aside and they're like, well, which shows do you listen to? What do you like about them? So it was like a mini focus group moment. And I was telling them honestly. Well, they called me a couple of weeks later and they were like, would you be interested in coming on the show? They're like, oh, they asked me what they were missing. I was like, y'all need to talk more about sports. I was like, Americans get organized around sports. I was like, so in the morning news, don't just give me the rundown of like the political news. Tell me who won the game. And so they called me like, well, it was like talking about March Madness actually back then. They were like, could you give us like an overview of March Madness? I was like, easily. I was like, I'll write you guys talking points. And the lady was like, no, we want you to come on. And I was like, yeah, I can come on. Let's do that. So I ended up, that became my gig. And I was the sports contributor to WNYC's show, The Takeaway, for about 3 years. And the reason why I mention that is because that gave me the ability, within like a few minutes, really, in a few minutes in a day, like in a like 30 minutes of work, I paid off my entire month. I went from being completely unemployed and hustling and had no idea, but had just got my master's, to someone now who had all this time. And it's like Virginia Woolf wrote a book called A Room of One's Own. And it really talked about like creating a space for the writer to find their voice, and you need that space. That's helped me articulate my voice for Green Deen: What Islam Teaches About Protecting the Planet, and helped get that idea out of me, and facilitated me being able to get it published. And it also sort of spurred forward like a lot of other things that now kicked into motion, meeting my wife, and locking that down. And then all the stuff that's happened since then, then I got a job at the mayor's office, in the mayor's office of long-term planning and sustainability, in the Bloomberg administration, which was like, very buttoned up, and you couldn't even go to a meeting without you having your jacket and your tie up, which are all like newer experiences for me. That was very much like good experiences to have and to sort of dive into that and understand. So all my inclinations about how things run, now I was in it. Now I was working with all the people working on like the thinking 100 years into the future. What is the city going to need? What are the challenges? What are we, how are we going to make these decisions? Um, and that's kind of where I've been now. I've since worked for a consulting firm as an aside, because that was an experience. But I came back to the government, worked for the New York City's water utility, primarily. So just the sort of where we're at is like the work that I do is helping translate how we make those big decisions around big infrastructure and around how we solve those persistent human problems. So now that's the work that I do. My clients are governments and nonprofits. And I think about those things all the time. It's literally the work that I do to help sort of, there's a way that I sort of, sorry, there was like I wrote this yesterday that I advise businesses, companies, nonprofits, as they create, evaluate, and implement low carbon, low emission, and other green policies and strategies. I look at I help people think about the built environment, energy, transportation, solid waste, water supply, stormwater management. And I do work with some startup companies on new products and new technologies and help them bring those technologies to scale, and sort of understand how they could be the best citizens they could possibly be. And I'm also like the third and fourth grade basketball coach for my third grader. And I'm like, the one of the dads in the stands at the baseball, rooting on my 10-year-old and my 8-year-old and my 5-year-old, my 6-year-old who also plays baseball, carting them around to their events and whatnot. I'll just say really quickly, baseball I think is important for a couple of reasons, particularly because it's an American game. And I'm not all in on the American project, but I will say we do live here. And I want them to have that kind of cultural currency when they're dealing with people. And baseball is a real family-oriented sport. But what I also like about it, more importantly, is that it teaches them about failure. And how do you do better? Is you practice, you put in your reps, you put in time, and they've seen it. They've seen when they put in time, they get better. And that may not be the sport that they play on as they get older, but that lesson of reps and time and effort is what will last when they go play other sports, soccer and track and basketball and whatever else that they're going to end up doing. So my life is really oriented around my sons. I'm about to cry thinking about that because they're just that's what. So everything I do is really to make sure that they have an example. Children are more. They don't do what they hear; they do what they see. There's a thing in Islam where you pray your 5 times a day, and then there's also prayers that happen in the middle of the night that in Islamic tradition, we understand that the closest you can be to God is in those late night prayers. And I remember waking up sometimes in the middle of the night and seeing my dad at prayer. And he didn't know that I saw him. As a matter of fact, to this day, he just doesn't. I mean, I talked to him about it recently and just said, this is what you would do. And he's like, oh, I didn't know you saw that. And to me, that has always stuck with me. And so, my whole focus is on setting enough of an example so that if I was to die tomorrow, that they would have a template of how we are as men in our family. having had a pretty good chain of transmission of information from, post-slavery to now. Those are things that are really important to me. So that's, that, I guess that's my story in a sort of like, in a way. I'm always like wrestling with things and questioning things. And lately, one of the things that I've been wrestling with and questioning is, the Black experience in America has always been very like taught to us as been, we were snatched out of Africa and we were living this idyllic life. But recently I've come to understand better that in fact, Black people sold other Black people in mass. And the reason why this is important is because I'm trying not to raise my sons with this idea of this like false narrative. The empowering part of that narrative to me is that if we are united as Black people, we are literally the most powerful people on the planet Earth. Like there is literally nothing, like they sucked Africa dry of people. Then after they did that, then they just went in with the Berlin Conference and sucked Africa dry of resources and controlled it. But if you imagine if we had been united and prevented that first wave, and if we had been united and organized and prevented the next wave, the European experiment, the colonial experiment, all these projects that have gone around, capitalism as it expands like a cancer would not even have existed. So like right now, what is our imperative? Like unity is actually the imperative for Black folks. That's why I get so frustrated with like in popular culture, you can still see it, even the verses thing where you pit this R&B artist against that R&B artist. Like that recreates that narrative. Malcolm versus Martin, Booker T. Washington versus W.E.B. Du Bois. All these different narratives that literally are part of the same way that we were divided and conquered from the beginning. So my thing with my son is like, we need to be Black folks that lean in. There's also, when you're, and the analogy is like, when you're the Black man in a white room, everyone in the room is white, and you see another Black man or Black woman, there's some Black people that they lean back and they're like looking around to see who's looking at them talking. And I'm like, nah, we're gonna lean in. You're gonna be like, what's happening, brother? What's popping? What's your story? Let's make sure we're on the same page. And that is where, that's where throughout the pandemic, I've been really thinking like, how can we be about unity? Because we could be the most powerful force on the earth still if we focus on that. And the challenges that we face right now are dramatic. And we're not in a good state. And, everyone wants to blame other people. I truly believe the test that we have is our test. The test that other folks have is their test. I don't want the white man's test, because the things that they have done under the name of white supremacy and other things, those are dramatic tests. If they're going to go back to God with that, that's tough. We have different tests. The test is just, do we support each other? And fundamentally, are we creating space for people to live after us? And that is the crux of how do we manage all of these resources, all of these systems, so that people can thrive. Making sure that there's clean water is not it's not a theoretical conversation. It's a fundamental one. It's the same thing our ancestors would have done in the past. Making sure that we have food to eat, or we know how to cultivate, or we know how to raise animals, and we know how to slaughter, and we know how to do all those different steps in the process. We know how to hunt. These are crucial things. So those are the things that I'm sort of, still thinking about and moving towards and leaning in on, if you will, among other things. But hopefully I didn't talk too much.
No, that's exactly what I wanted you to do, because your story, your flow, and how you get that across to people, in presentations and whatever. So no, I appreciate that. and the emotion that you have, for your family, for your children. I mean, that is the kind of thing other people can connect to. And it's, really important, I think, to get that across, because of the way in which America wants to vilify people who are non-Christian. And if you think of what
Of course.
the common narrative here is that people of Muslim faith are terrible people, let's just put it that way. And
Yeah,
and that
of
was
course.
one of the main things that I really want to get across. And I think the
Mm,
story of your children and how important that is to you to pass on those traditions of what it means to be a man in your family. And I also wanted to ask you about, in terms of the work you do,
mm.
and making sure that people understand the importance of taking care of the environment. I mean, how much of that is motivated by your love of your children, in terms of you want to make sure that if people do the things that you're helping them do, that makes the world better for your children after you're gone. And just wondering how much of a motivation that is for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think of I think it's equally a motivation for ensuring that they have they have something for them to do, and that the world isn't completely ruined. But it's also, as I feel as much pressure from the folks that have come before me, um, who were also in my mind like, and I always think of George Washington Carver. Not that I'm related to him, but just like that level of awareness. Okay, let me just back up. Science as a discipline is about observation, and about applying that observation to sort of use what we've looked at, to use it in a productive way. Most of science that we have in the Western context is wasted thinking about the origins of things, the origin of life, the origin of the universe. Where do we come from? Well, as a person of faith, I know that. So I'm starting from that point. And it gives you much more space to actually dive into how to use what we have. So someone like George Washington Carver or Albert Einstein, all very spiritual people, very religious people, were almost, their form of their worship was looking into the natural world and saying, well, look what God created. And how do I use this to benefit myself and my family and my community? How do I regenerate this, as opposed to extracting and using it and throwing it away, consuming? But how does this part of a regenerative lifestyle? So I think for me, it's like, I think of that sort of, he was light years ahead of where we are now. That deep knowing and understanding. Like when I lived upstate, I remember one morning. I mean, I could wake up and smell the air and see the sky and tell you what the weather would be, because my ancestors on my father's side were native from upstate New York. And I always thought that there was some information passed through that made me understand, okay, so it's going to be this kind of weather, it's going to be this kind of day. That kind of awareness is just sort of like literally the tip of the iceberg. Could you imagine being our ancestors just in this country as African Americans, like George Washington Carver and others, or even like 1880s or 1890s, Black people, everyone that was around in those era, in that time, you could take any human being from any place on the planet and say to them, that plot of land is yours. And they would know what to do. You give them a couple tools, any human being, Turks, Chinese, Europeans, Africans, folks from everywhere on the planet. If you said, that plot of land, you have it, they would say, okay, great, I'm going to make it useful. And none of us today have any idea how to do any of that stuff. Not none of us, but by and large, we're lost. We would have no clue. So that part of it's like, if I'm going to honor what they have been able to understand and know and do, and the accumulation of human knowledge and experience that clearly is inside of us, the least that I could do is be critical of how we manage these things right now. The least I could do is understand how to grow a tomato plant or how to compost or you know, like to just know where my water comes from. Just know where it comes from. 90% of the people, someone needs to do research on this, don't have a clue where their water comes from. No idea. You flush a toilet, it goes magically away. But think of that same prehistoric person I was talking about before. There's faucets that if you put your hand in front of it, the water just comes out. Could you imagine them seeing that? They would think that you were some kind of sorcerer. We have advanced so dramatically and so astonishingly, but we forgot how we got here. And so part of me is like, making sure that my sons understand how we got here will help them be able to create something that I can't even imagine. That's like the challenge there. It's like we are at this juncture point. So, and so part of what I try and do is make sure that I have a network of people in my community that can teach them things that I can't teach them. Go learn how to work with wood in a way from someone who knows what they're doing. Or like what I was taught was like, here, figure this out, carve this out. Here's a block of wood. You're going to make this. These are your tools. Figure it out. You need to make a spoon. How do you make a spoon? These are things that like, so to me, it's like, it's there. And then also for them to be leaders in the future. You're not going to be a leader if you know how to use Instagram, because Instagram's not going to exist. Some other form of it might exist, or some other type of thing might exist, but that's not a skill set that you need for the future. What you need for the future is how to organize people, how to persuade people, how to inspire people, how to see a tool and say, oh, I can make this useful. How to like heal someone with food, like those are the skill sets that are timeless, but also timely at this particular moment. And so really it is about like the larger planet, but I also feel like I'm raising folks who will have to be leaders in a world of people who are not prepared for what's happening. And they're gonna be freaking out, and then they're gonna need some calm voices to say, okay, we got this. I was once on an expedition in Joshua Tree, and the first night of the expedition, the leader of the expedition took a stove, like one of these outdoor stoves, like MSR stoves, if you've ever done camping. And he was like, come over here. He's like, I'm going to teach you how to clean this, but I'm not going to teach you. I'm just going to show you. And you're just going to watch. Because at some point in this expedition, you might need to know this information. So he's like, just watch. He wasn't narrating. He just said, watch. So we watched everything that he did. So there's like 20 days later, we're still out in the woods, out in the desert together. There's a huge storm coming, massive storm in the distance. Coyotes had raided our camp and had eaten a bunch of our food. So we had to fend off these coyotes. There's a storm coming in the distance. We're trying to get a stove lit, and we realize the stove is dirty. So the team that had been assigned to clean the stove that day were like, stove is dirty, we don't know what to do. Me and this other guy were like, we watched them. And we went over there, we cleaned the stove. We were like, do you remember this part? You remember? We didn't write anything down. We didn't do anything like that. We just remembered what we had done because it was such a particular moment. We got the stove going, we got dinner going, everyone got fed. We got our shelter set up, and we braced for the night, and that storm was ferocious. And if we had not done that, we would have gotten into the storm where I hadn't eaten anything, shivering in the cold, because the desert swings from under 30 degrees to like almost 100 degrees during the day. Like that kind of knowledge, we have to. It's like that experiential knowledge is what drives me for them. And so it does make me, it motivates me that they have experiences. So like my youngest or my oldest, there was a period of time he didn't even know that people didn't compost. he was like, "Man, where's their compost? Like, why don't they compost?" He didn't even think that that was like a thing. It's like, what do you, because we were living in Brooklyn at the time and we would bring our compost to the compost drop off. That was his life. Every Saturday we go, we get our bag of compost out of the freezer. You know, we put all the organics in there, we bring it to the thing. And then when we moved into a house and we had a yard and we compost I set up a compost on our own. And then when we wanted to plant stuff and we wanted more rich soil, we got the soil out of our own compost. So the stuff that we had eaten, they could see the cycle of that stuff going back. And then our cucumbers, we had like 2 or 3 cucumbers every day for like 2 months. Big cucumbers that were just bursting out of this thing because we had this rich compost that we had been developing. So my other son was like, why would we eat compost? Why would we eat cucumbers from the store? He just didn't even understand that. Like, that doesn't make sense. Why would you buy things when you could just grow it? So that kind of lived experience is absolutely so much more valuable than telling them this is important. Now they just know.
Yeah, I mean, and I am an experiential learner myself, in terms of and a visual learner.
Yeah.
I mean, and the interesting thing, and part of that's because I'm a photographer, filmmaker, and I write, but I don't consider writing to be my strong suit. I kind of struggle with writing, but I'm getting much better at it. But I do consider myself a decent storyteller in terms of being able to determine, the kinds of things that make, something compelling and interesting to other people. But I mean, so much of what you're saying here is the same kinds of things that are important to me. I mean, I have been an outdoor person my entire adult life. Like you, I had an experience in Alaska on a mountaineering trip, and I watched we had multiple teams and multiple instructors, and he was telling us how to tie these life-saving knots, but I had to watch him and remember how he did it visually in order to know how to do. I mean, he could say, do this and do that, and he would even say the name of the knot. None of that stuff I remember. What I remember is seeing his hands do these critical kinds of loops and all kinds of stuff that made the knot safe. And I still have those ropes in my basement. And so, yeah, I mean, having those kinds of experiences, I mean, it's part of the reason I watch YouTube so much, is because that's how I learn. I don't learn, sadly, it's embarrassing, I don't learn picking up a book and reading cover to cover. I have to watch you do it either live or watch you do it on the internet, and then do it myself, and because my brain is recording the frames that it's seeing, and then I can play those frames back, for lack of a better explanation, and be able to sort of mimic what I see people doing. So that has always been the way in which I learn stuff. And also part of the reason I enjoy being outdoors so much is because there's so many opportunities to learn through experiences, through having experiences. And that to me is super important. So I want to back up a little bit and ask, if you had to give yourself a job title, a name for the thing that you do, because I'm in a very similar boat. I don't have a job title.
I usually give myself the title of, at the moment, I call myself an urban strategist.
Okay, I like that. That works. That works. Because, people, how it is, people want to be able to identify with you. And so it's like, oh,
I don't think I've ever seen anyone use that. That's why I started using it.
Okay. Yeah,
because
I like that.
It's comprehensive.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do have to go in the 3 minutes.
Okay.
So I apologize for the brevity.
Yeah, I mean, I got a lot. I still, the thing.
If there's more, then I'm open to, obviously, to reschedule more time.
Yeah, I would say I would like to reschedule, because I want to be able to get to that piece of sort of humanizing,
Yep.
for lack of a better word, your faith, and
Yeah.
and getting people to understand the connectivity between your faith and the environment. Because I think it's super important for people to be able to understand you, because people are going to want to vilify you because you're not.
That's right.
Yeah,
True.
and that's exactly one of the main reasons here, is to completely undo that.
Yeah.
So we will, yeah, because I see you have in an hour here. We can reschedule, and I can try to figure out I've got another monitor going here with questions on it, and I can figure out from what we've talked about, what we can go back over again and get the new stuff in there. So and I've done it with other people, multiple Zooms, until we get to the end there. So, but anyway, I appreciate your time today, and we will just reschedule for, I don't know, probably more like sometime next month.
Okay.
But
Whatever works for you. Yeah.
yeah,
My schedule, the Calendly adjusts for the count for the time zone.
oh, it does. Okay.
So if whatever gaps you see are actual gaps.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. All right. Well, you go do your day.
I have
And
to go present a thing. It's called Getting Off Fossil Fuels in Buildings.
oh,
I'm leading a conversation about it's super nerdy. I'll send you the title.
yeah, that sounds great.
It's yeah, it's opportunities for municipalities to lead with advanced energy codes.
Nice. And
So
who will the people that
it'll be mostly city like innovation officers or building code specialists, like that sort of folk.
okay.
City personnel. We have a person from NYSERDA, which is the New York City Energy Research Development Authority, who's going to share with folks how they could apply for $500,000 in funding to update their building code. So really, it's like there's going to be probably a couple hundred people on that represent small cities around upstate New York State mainly, because it's like these municipalities don't have the money to do this,
Right.
but
It is.
if people are going to offer that, so
Yeah, if you can find the money, then
if you can find it, exactly, then they can make it happen.
yeah,
So,
for sure.
all
All
right,
right. I'm
it
going to
was a
let you
pleasure.
go, man. You take care of yourself, and we will be in touch.
Thanks a lot. Have a good one.
All right. Take care.
Peace.
Yeah.